Welcome to today's episode of the Flank Podcast.
I'm kind of cracking up at the idea of someone non-technical getting the binary and like going into the terminal and being like, all right, it's time to go.
Yeah, it's no fun. One of the first things we needed was essentially a bot system. So I basically have Rust code that will just launch some bots that will basically join this room and act like students.
Like his friend had like a data scraper or needed like data scraped and was like, oh yeah, like I'm just gonna send you over this like executable every time, and then you have to like do that and like explain that. It's kind of funny.
I'm Angus.
I'm Mallory.
I'm Bryce.
I'm Trevor.
And we're Flank.
Today, we'll be talking to Matt Zeitlin, who uses Flank to help him build his chess app, Rookly.
Sure. So yeah, the main big current push right now is we're trying to start a chess league in the winter. So essentially an esports chess league, kind of like how if you played on an athletics team in middle school, you go play a neighbor's school once a week. So it could either be a school that's a similar skill level across the country, or it could be some partner school that, the schools want to have more, interconnection. But basically, what I'm looking for is if there are good examples of things like this that kind of exist, because one of the problems I'm running into is just that it's just at first a big issue on like how it's going to work in terms of you need to basically build a portal for a teacher to talk about their school and to put a list of players and to put their skill levels, and there's just basically a bunch of information we need to collect. But the tricky part is really the scheduling. And I remember when we tried to build the short private lesson feature, this was a huge annoyance where I could not for the life of me find scheduling tools that were, flexible enough to use in, our infrastructure. So I basically had to build like a small version, which felt like a big waste, but it's almost going to be a more complicated version of that with the school stuff, because each school is going to have to be like, oh, I'm free on this day for these 10 weeks. And then, they have to be able to update that information. And I mean, dealing with dates and times is never any fun, and calendars and time zones. So if you know of anything or have any starting points.
Yeah, that sounds hard. So is it purely a technical question, or are you guys trying to figure out also like how to organize the league, like what it's going to consist of, like who's going to be in it?
It's one big piece is like the administrative side. How do you make it as easy as possible for an administrator? And then there's also a separate question of how do you make the league experience itself the best, which I think for now we've kind of tabled, because the goal is to do the classic, build the way that people can book the league and then worry about building the actual league itself later. But.
So what is I'm just curious. I don't think this really has anything to do with the implementation, but like, what is chess does not seem like a seasonal sports. Like, what is it about the winter that makes it a winter league? Is that just like when school's out or something?
Oh,
and
no,
like
just
people
winter that's the goal for getting it built for the first run. But the idea would be that it would be yeah.
I see. Okay.
Because the goal is always
there's nothing particular about winter.
No, nothing particular about winter, although chess does do best in winter because, one of at least the big question marks people would have about our program is that it's online. But when kids can't go outside for after school programs and such, it's a lot better selling point.
Yeah.
But the idea is really just to build chess engagement, because we've seen that schools we work with that have in-house tournaments and stuff like that, the kids just care so much more than if it's just purely some kind of abstract sense of learning.
Yeah.
So interesting. What were you gonna say, Bryce?
I was just gonna say, I think it's like also just like I like played esports for a bit in like high school and stuff, and like I think like chess is definitely something that stands a much better chance from like the esports side of things, just because it's like I played like Hearthstone and like Overwatch for a while, and like I think any video game has a way more niche population than just like the universality of like chess. So that's like definitely like a really cool thing in your favor. And like I feel like why like an esports league for that would be a lot more likely. Like have you kind of Just
You know,
noticed
that was our basic thought, that it was this weird place where, one of the statistics is that I think 2 million kids play chess in schools, but only 30K play competitively, because playing competitive chess, you're pretty much you have to actually go somewhere local. Tournaments are long, they're painful, they can be expensive. And yeah, the online scene just doesn't seem to exist to the extent you'd expect.
What do the like Twitch streamers and stuff who are like grandmasters play? Like, because I thought they played on like competitive platforms and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
so the huge one is chess.com. That's where, if you just want to play a game of chess, you'd play on. But there's basically no way that, you can organize your own kind of tournament or league in the same way we'd want to on chess.com.
Okay.
What's kind of like, just to follow up with that, because I've followed that, like the Twitch chess scene a little bit. What's y'all's main roadblock for organizing similar stuff yourselves? Like, just out of curiosity, because I know that
Well,
there like are online tournaments and stuff, right? But they seem pretty rare.
yeah, so, I think chess.com and related definitely has down the whole big online tournament, hosted on Twitch with streamer scene. And that's not something that we really want to compete with. It's more how do we create, let's say, just like an ad hoc tournament for one of our schools, or how do we create, a league where 10 similar schools can play against each other? And that just doesn't seem to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like a lack of physical chess happening kind of in mass.
Yeah, it's just hard because it's physical. So then either you have small tournaments, or just you're very location dependent. So if you're a New York City school, that can be fine. But in most part of the country, it's very hard to find a chess tournament unless you're a serious player who's willing to fly to a different state.
Most people are just confined to playing the people at their school, if there even are other people there. So it's like you have like 5 opponents, and then it's like you just
Yeah, I
play
think
them over and over.
there's a big gap between kind of learning chess in school and being a kind of competitive chess player.
Yeah.
Because if you really want to play on the competitive scene, you're just traveling a ton. You're playing at tournaments all weekend. That's honestly part of the reason I
That
stopped playing.
that is insane.
Yeah,
The fact that like chess requires a bunch of travel.
yeah. But the real problem with online chess is the cheating problem, because
Cheating's a lot harder in
it's
person.
it's incredibly easy to cheat on chess online. Like, I could in 5 seconds
Yeah.
pull up an engine that, is significantly better than the world's best grandmaster. So, there are ways to do cheat detection, but they're not particularly reliable. So part of figuring out the user experience is figuring out the cheating, because I think that's one of the main big hurdles behind the idea.
Yeah. That's
The hope is pretty much
I don't
that the
know. I
schools
don't
will be self-policing, because most of them will do it with their kids all together in a room, let's say during the after-school period. So
yeah.
then that helps to some extent. But the other goal is to make it competitive, but almost not competitive enough that you incentivize someone to go out of their way to cheat.
I wonder if you could almost have like a review system where people can get flagged for suspicious
Oh, that's exactly how
activity or
the automated
something, and
test.
like
Yeah, it basically works by saying what level was this game played at, and if it's abnormal, then it gets flagged. Um, so that works for super obvious cases, like if you have you know a young kid who's playing at a grandmaster level, that's very suspicious. But
yeah. But it's
most
hard to
cases,
detect like a little cheat here and there.
exactly, like, what do you do if the thing tells you there's a 90% chance someone cheated? We're not going to go accuse someone.
Yeah, yeah, that's tricky. Um, Interesting. Okay, so then scheduling. So then does your co-founder handle the part of like going out and finding schools and doing
Yeah,
like the
I mean
biz
that's the
dev
other reason we
piece of
want to
that?
build this league, is that we've had a ton of schools that, even the ones that say no to the lessons, they're like, hey, if you had this league, we'd totally be in. Um,
Yeah.
and it's also just a good way to incentivize school referrals because one school's like, hey, you want to join this league, and then we get to talk to them too. So it just works really well in that sense. So yeah, the idea is, yeah, we actually already have like in theory, a big list of schools. Although it's tricky because if you want a league, you also need to be able to match on age and skill level. So um, you actually need a decent number of schools in the start.
So the scheduling stuff that you looked at, like what were the platforms, tools, etc., that you looked at and couldn't be fit into
Like
your infrastructure?
the main one, like let's say Calendly, for example.
Hmm.
What I was hoping for is that Calendly would have a flexible enough API that I could like embed something like Calendly in the site, and then there'd also be sufficient webhooks, API calls, whatever that would be able to, when someone books something on Calendly, be able to send some webhook or something so we can update that a lesson was booked, something like that. Um, and that just doesn't seem to exist. Calendly just doesn't actually have a very flexible API. Or maybe it did, but it was very expensive. I don't remember. And I looked at a bunch of other ones, just did the classic Googles, and there just didn't seem to be robust APIs around it. One of the annoying parts with the calendars is that what you'd like to do is have it sync with a user's calendar. The problem is everyone uses different calendars. So then, um, you need integrations for Outlook, you need integrations for Gmail, which is why it would be nice if you could use a built-in provider like Calendly. But I just couldn't find something that achieved what we wanted.
Yeah, I'm
Interesting.
guessing
It
you
seems like
looked
a
at
good startup idea in of itself, but
you looked at Clockwise, I'm guessing, right?
Clockwise, let me see.
Because I just like met someone who I've talked to a handful of times there, and he like helps put in like new product ideas and stuff like that. So if this is something it seems like it would take forever to get built, and like you wouldn't really be like high paying enough. But I would imagine that
Yeah,
there's a
well,
lot.
we can suggest it to them. Yeah, right now it looks more like just like a general meeting type scheduler. Looks
Yeah,
cool though, although I'm suspicious of any chat GPT powered technology. But
Any AI tool that doesn't seem to need a chatbot?
exactly.
Anything that says powered by but nothing else?
You're not ready for the beast to be unleashed in every product.
I'm terrified of it if it actually works, so then I just have to hope it's not good enough. Yeah. But if it's not good enough, then it's not worth using the service.
Yeah.
um, and then interesting. So could you use like the Google Calendar API, or is that, or you need something that like abstracts over like Apple Calendar?
The idea would be to have something abstract. It's just, what do you do if someone doesn't use it? And the other annoying thing is that, like, it's annoying for a user if they need to have their Rookly account and then also a different account. So if it's Google, it's okay because then, they can just use the Google OAuth and we can also have calendar permissions. But it's annoying if someone wants to, I mean, our login flow in general is not the most robust for those social connections just because we haven't focused on that. And I mean, we use Auth0. I know you use Auth0 too, but it's also not the most consumer friendly with respect to all that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, what you would be scheduling? Would you be scheduling schools and all the kids play at the same time, or would you be scheduling individual kids? Like just based on their schedules. Because I'm thinking of a regular kids soccer league that's like every Tuesday night from 6 to 8,
Yeah.
but you want like individual. You want their schedules to determine when it is, as opposed to just setting a set time.
Basically, the goal would be for each school or whoever at that school is going to be managing this chess league on their end to be able to say, we'd be free to do an hour or 2 hours for the league at, these dates.
Mm-hmm.
But the scheduling does need to be somewhat flexible because, schools have different holidays. They have weird days off. They have parent teacher conferences.
Yeah,
So,
you're scheduling maybe a
you
school in
know,
California and a school in
oh yeah,
Pennsylvania.
and there's also the time zones exactly.
Yeah.
I almost wonder, does it need to be a user experience where like they lay out their exact availability and then like you perfectly slot everything, or could it be something where like you just do a first pass at the schedule and then everyone's like hey, this, and then everyone says like this doesn't work, this works, whatever, and then you can kind of like go from there.
No, it's definitely an option. Um, it's hard to communicate with schools in general because some are responsive, some are not.
Yeah.
So if there's a lot of back and forth, it gets annoying. But yeah, no, that's definitely what we might end up doing for kind of the first go round.
And is it like a season,
I think the idea is
or is it like a collection of tournaments?
I think the thought is they'd be seasonal, but I'm sure we'll also branch out into pseudo tournaments as well because we've had some interest in that too.
Yeah, dude, this would be so like if you're in chess club and like you just never play other schools, this would be like such a massive improvement. Like I'm just imagining like going to basketball practice all day but like never playing another team. It'd be terrible.
Yeah, I hated basketball practice, so that was yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Do you
Hopefully
think like
coach
maybe
Sullivan's not
it could work like in some senses to start off at like just a much smaller scale in the way that you said like, oh, we could eventually do like pseudo tournaments and stuff outside of a season. Maybe you like start with like a season or like yeah, like a season that's like based around tournaments. So then this way you like only need to organize like 5 parties together at once and kind of like break down and compartmentalize like the scheduling. Then as you like get some learnings from that, you can kind of combine that and like stitch them together. Because I know when like Overwatch League was like first like developing their thing, they like were having a lot of issues with the scheduling and stuff, and they ended up eventually just being like, oh, if we break it down into a bunch of mini tournaments, then like they only have to worry about a couple of parties at each time. And as long as it works for them, they just like make a group of 5 and make it work for that, and like do that for all like 15 or 30 teams, and then it eventually like scales.
No, I mean that's a good idea. I think that we've kind of been thinking about it like this is my main-ish priority until the winter or so. So it's likely it will be a small scale process, but part of the selling point we also have is just that we want it to be as easy and flexible as possible. So we almost want it so that to use Rookly, the teacher basically has to spend the bare minimum amount of time possible setting their schedule and everything, and it doesn't have to be the big deal for them. I'm sure there will be a lot more manual work up front, but I think we'd like to be able to test whatever we can with respect to, what any kinds of future automation would look like.
Yeah, it almost feels like you need. Well, I don't know. I guess one place that my mind goes is delegation, and like what kind of responsibilities can you delegate to another tool or to the schools themselves?
Yeah.
Like for example, like if you just created a bunch of like Google Calendar events automatically, and then it was like, okay, here's kind of like your like the first pass at your schedule. Now it's on you to like coordinate with people and reschedule this stuff if it doesn't work for you. But even like, if they do that, like they can use like the rescheduling interface in Google Calendar as opposed to
something like that is a good idea. I just think we don't want to rely on the schools scheduling amongst themselves.
yeah.
But that's basically the main frustration and the main question that I feel like in part, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there are good services that can help deal with parts of this, that would be great. I just haven't been able to find them.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
What does the end user experience need to be?
So I think there's the two end users. The one is the whoever the administrator for the school that's running it. And, you know, the goal for them is for it to be as easy as possible for them to set their schedules and then know when they need to get the kids, know what the links are, know how to say that a kid is out today or that they need to skip this week. And then, yeah, the other end user is the
How
kid
much?
themselves.
How much over like are the teachers having to like go to the link on a specific computer and like help each kid get set up type of thing?
So usually the way it works is that the links are just bookmarked on the devices in the class that we
Yeah.
run. So there's some amount of setup the first day or in like an onboarding session, but then especially if kids are like third grade or older, they can just click the link and be good to go. So the idea from the kid end is that all they should have to do is basically hit a link and then it will guide them in terms of you're playing this game now, you have another game in 5 minutes, you know.
Yeah. 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 Hmm. Not an easy problem.
Yeah. I mean, and then there's a whole other separate tricky question of like, you've got 7 people on this team, 10 people on this team. How do you actually automate the matching of the players? And, what are the time controls? How many games do they play? What's just the best experience there? Because we've seen other esports teams that basically do it like tennis, where, you have like a top 4 and then the other games don't matter. We also want to make it so that kids who aren't as good can still have a good experience and feel like they're active.
So do you want to give Mallory and Trevor just a little bit of background on kind of like your exposure to Flank and what we had talked about before and like what's currently in there?
One of the first things we needed was essentially a bot system. So I basically have Rust code that will just launch some bots that will basically join this room and act like students, basically make random moves. So now, if I want to request suggestions, people are going to make random moves, and I can even, put them in breakout rooms, and we can watch them make random moves against each other. So it gives a good way of actually showing what's going on. So the problem with the bots is that the way it's kind of worked is that my co-founder is extremely non-technical. So the goal has been, how do I find the easiest way for him to run the bots? And the solution that luckily worked for us is that he has the same Mac with the new M1 ARM architecture. So I could actually build the binary on my computer and send it to him. But it's a huge pain because anytime I change the code, I need to go through the steps of building the binary. I put a new version on Google Drive. He's got to download it. We've got to figure out how to get the permissions set again. So I have to give him like the terminal commands. And then also he's got to use the terminal and he's got to run this command when, he has no familiar with terminal and stuff. So even that's also just annoying. So basically the thought was, what would be nice is if we could just launch the bots as an ad hoc Fargate ECS task, whatever you want to call it. And that would make sense. It was just something that I never really wanted to build because it seemed like just never was a priority. But it seemed like a good use case for what Flank was doing with building a bridge between the less technical and the more technical, so that all I would have to do is provide a task that can be run, and then Flank can provide the whole UI for actually launching the task, stopping the task, etc. So I'll go back to...
makes sense. I'm kind of cracking up at the idea of someone non-technical getting the binary and like going into the terminal and being like, all right, it's time to go.
Yeah, it's no fun. Yeah.
That's literally exactly what Clay's use case is too. Like his
Yeah.
friend had like a data scraper or needed like data scraped and was like, oh yeah, like I'm just gonna send you over this like executable every time, and then you have to like do that and like explain that. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we do have a...
So one question that I would have is like, if you're going to be changing this all the time, do you want to just expose that as a parameter?
Yeah, so what I liked before was I remember we had some parameters that we were able to lock. And I think we did that
Yeah.
with the cluster ARN or something too. So the cluster ARN won't actually change much, but the task definition might change, let's say, every 2 weeks or so if there's a new release that affects the lesson logic.
So if there's a new release and you always want to have that, like where you have that like :2,
Yeah,
that like
we actually
specifies
just
the version. So you could always just
yeah.
specify like latest, or if you don't even have a colon, it automatically uses the latest version.
Oh, well, that's useful.
So I'd recommend either.
Oh, I see. So like
Should we see?
interesting. So like that ARN is going to be the same, but it'll just update the version number at the end there.
If he's just creating and publishing new versions of that. I don't know
Is
that
that
for
what you're
sure
doing, Matt?
about ECS instances, but that's how it works with ECR, Lambda layers, and Lambdas themselves. So I'm assuming if it works for all three of those, it extrapolates the same way to that.
So actually, one thing we were just talking about is like if you go back to Flank and then back to kind of the main page there, like is this too overwhelming for Amir?
I mean,
And if so, kind of like how do we make it simpler so that it's like just what he needs to see?
so I think this is leagues better than what came before, so it's definitely better even just as is. But I think it would be best if these were just friendly names like stop, start, list, and then the other random crap wasn't there too.
Oh, really? Okay, so you can change that. So if you hover
Okay.
over like player task, yeah, you can go into it too. And then configure.
Okay, yeah. So if we just name this start, and then whoops. Okay, that's easy. Yeah, and then just rename this guy stop. Yeah, okay. So this is perfect.
Would it be helpful to
So
have
then-
a view for you that's allows you to view things as Amir sees them? Because like the crap up top that's like untitled, Matthew's Island, etc., he wouldn't see, but I could see it potentially being useful to be able to view it as him.
It's definitely helpful, but I think not, at least for our use case now, is simple enough that like if it's just the bots, then I think it's fine. But yeah, it probably would make sense if there were a lot more options, because it still helps me to have more information than just stop and start.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
then
guess
can
we
we
could
go
also
back into
probably-
this? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, I don't know how often I use recents for some unpublished thing that I haven't, exposed to anyone else, but it seems like we could potentially make it simpler to not have the unpublished stuff in the recents. I don't know. Just thought.
Yeah, although
But if you're working with that yourself, like you might want to go back. Like I actually find myself using that pretty frequently.
yeah, I actually do too.
So then, okay, let's go back to stop real quick. Okay, so this one takes, you can punch in like a task ID and the cluster and a region name, which like you don't want Amir to do that necessarily.
So these were the
And
ones.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and so, and I think this was the one where I set something up and I got it working, but I also just kind of want to go through this from scratch. Just in terms of like how do you think in terms of creating like form controls around that? Like what would be like an intuitive experience? Like what do you want to do and what would be intuitive basically?
Well, so I think what would be most intuitive is if it came from the list.
Yeah.
So like ideally also on stuff like list, there wouldn't have to be any explicit run. I mean, it's not a big deal, but this might be assuming this might need to be. because the cluster should be unchanged. Can I lock this? List index out of range. Oh, is this split with the colon?
Oh, I see.
But yeah, so I mean, ideally this would be more like a dashboard where you just go to list and then the list is just there. And then maybe there's some like refresh icon or something. So it doesn't have to constantly poll. But that's not a big deal. Because yeah, I'm
So
just
what do you
imagining.
mean? So yeah, so I like that idea, but can you explain in a little more detail, like what you mean by that?
So I'm just imagining like if I
Actually, really like that.
like if I go to list and then instead of seeing a run, it's actually just would also be good. I don't know if Amir sees these, but it'd also be good if the locked stuff doesn't show, um, or if there's a way to hide the locked stuff.
It's
So
like
there
almost like
is.
in the same way our drop downs kind of work when they like automatically run. Like it feels like it should just like be something that auto runs and it kind of like has a dashboardy type like feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking about it
Yeah.
like when I go to my Auth0 dashboard or something, I click users, I see the users.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like either having a feature that lets you auto run it, so it runs every time you load it, or it's like a see latest run. I could also see that because see
Yeah.
latest run, you could basically Angus implementation wise append the latest run group ID as opposed to creating a new one, and you would get that run that showed up.
Yeah. Okay, so there's some good things to think about in here. So one is, and we were actually just talking about this, our little like dot 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 hover menu that like you get when you hover over the thing. So that's got hide in it. I don't know
Oh,
if you saw that.
nice.
But
That's perfect. Okay.
but like you just clicked on that like 4 times and you missed it. So I think like by definition, like that's not very intuitive. Um
I
and I
was more
wonder
just
like what.
curiosity though. I think I would have found it, but I wasn't actually looking for the hide that much. I just didn't know it existed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, do you
And
think that's a good place for it, or we should stash it like I
I
don't
mean, these
know.
little guys are nice, but I don't know.
You're saying just like showing those icons as like buttons as opposed to just like
I mean, I
something that
guess
shows the status.
it depends on if like the most common case is hiding or not. I would imagine that the kind of hiding uncommonly changed things like a cluster arm might be useful. Just making that very easy. But
I almost wonder. I mean, one thought is like, are there times that you're kind of like in edit mode, and then other times that you're just kind of in like do other stuff mode, and like would it make sense to like have a button where you turn on edit mode and it just shows it kind of
that's what I
like
kind of like.
shows you all of the things you can do.
That's what I kind of like what Mallory was talking about. You know, Amir has his view and then I have my view, and my view can almost be permanent edit mode. Um, and then his view is just
Yeah,
the very simple, doesn't have to, because even something like this he doesn't need to see. You know, not that
right,
it's a big
right, right,
deal.
right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I like that idea. And then what happened when we ran this thing? Are those bots still active right now?
They are.
Okay, I want to see if we can get this one working too.
I got the sense because
Drag trays.
I updated the ARN to remove the colon, but it looks like I don't know if something here is relying on.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Can we?
I can add back the colon. I can. Um,
Well,
like
yeah.
was
Let's
that
see
the
if it
thing that
works with
changed?
with 3.
You could also just keep latest. You could write latest instead of a thing, and then it always just
oh,
does.
there we go.
Okay, so let's say we kind of start with this. Now, kind of like, how are you thinking about, I want to stop this thing? Like, what
So
would be,
I was imagining a table that's two columns: room, number of bots, and then just like a stop button. Um,
yeah,
I think would be the perfect world. Um,
as a mirror's experience, you're saying?
yeah, as a mirror's experience.
Yeah. Then from a developer point of view, you just need to pass. The task ARN is like the one thing you need to pass.
Yeah,
Okay. So
but that is not
then,
what I would trust a mirror to do.
right. Yeah. Okay. So let's go. Can we go back to the home page real quick? And go to like that stop running task one at the very bottom.
This one?
It's got it's got like the blocks next to it.
Oh, so this one looks like it is auto running. Or,
So that does auto run. Yeah. And then
but it might
like
still have.
basically like a mirror would get like inputs there.
I see. Yeah, and then you just copy them. Hmm.
Did
Oh wait, let me. Okay, let's change this to. So you think this just
Oh
latest one?
yeah.
We could try that. That's
Yeah, that should work.
That purple highlight should like go away at some point.
I can try three. If three worked on the other one. Okay, so that's here now. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, yeah. So then, see, I mean, this is perfect. Ideally, it would be a bit more, user friendly for someone who's never seen what like the terminal commands look like. But this is exactly the idea that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're gone. That's perfect. Yeah, so I think that
Okay,
looks
so
pretty.
like my my main takeaway here is that you would think about this in terms of like getting the list of stuff first and then like attaching the stop command onto list output as opposed to like starting with the stop command and then like piping a drop down into that.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I kind of think about it as if, like when you use something like Auth0, there's all the dashboards, all those convenient things. It would be great if Flink can basically speed up the process of building those um, basically administration dashboards of similar quality. Um,
Yeah.
so then it's almost the fewer steps that are possible, it's always better. But of course, that's tougher too.
Yeah, and it's like almost like the type of view where like you literally just see a row of tables and then just want to take like an action based off of those tables or those rows.
Exactly. Because, like, I mean, another thing I'm doing a bunch nowadays, which I don't know, it's probably hard to customize, but just administration tables for just like a lot of like CRUD operations, so I can imagine Flink useful for that stuff like that too. Um, which always just feels tedious, but
Yeah.
you know,
So what do you guys do you have like an internal site that Amir uses that you've built?
yeah, there's basically like a slash admin that is a bunch of admin only pages.
Do you want to can you show us what that looks like?
Sure, I can pull it up here. Okay. So it varies for the people. So like, there's some before we were trying to do more around like offering lessons to random people. So there's some stuff about, editing a teacher's profile. They can add some information that will, affect the view a user will see. this is an example of the calendar stuff I hate, where when we were doing some private lesson stuff, people would have to use a calendar like this to update their availability. Um, and it uses, I don't know if you've ever done like the calendar recurrence rules and R rules, but you can like, like drag a slot and you're like, oh, I'm free Tuesdays and Thursdays for a while. But,
This is cool.
this is an example of stuff I found not good though, because like it was a decent amount of work and it didn't look that good. And there's still like some weird bugs with time zones and stuff. Um, so it just annoys me.
So
but
is this stuff that like only you and Amir use, or like would a teacher go in and look at this too?
So this is the idea is this is something also a teacher would do, but then we also want to be able to edit teachers' calendars. But so a teacher could basically say, I'm available these times for private lessons, then someone could book.
Got it.
So that's one example of something we have. And then back when we were offering more like classes, there's just tables to do just, like the more annoying administration things. Like, so, like this is a class. So then here's all the fields, the teacher, you want to be able to edit them. And then, there's links to other stuff like I want to create a class, which is another very similar form, or even other minor annoyances like on the homepage, classes show up in an order. So then you want to be able to tweak the order of the classes. So these are all things that I custom built, but they're never seen by a user, so it's not a great use of time. Let's see. And then there's similar stuff like seeing our users. We're still working on it, but basically we're building like a puzzle database type thing to try to standardize curriculums. And then, or like lists of schools. We have views into like the sessions that have happened. So like you can actually see, each of the things that happen in a lesson. So there's just a bunch of views like this that they're not all hard to build, but it would be nice to not build some of them, especially for a lot of the ones that are just pretty generic tables. I mean, the problem is pretty generic is never quite true because there's always some, stuff that's just hard to make apply to every use case. But yeah.
Yeah. My question here would be, let's see, we can just pick one of them. This could be one of them. So is there like an action that you take on each of these, or is it just
So the action might be like, let's say I'm
you
editing
drill
my
down
work,
into it?
so I can
Okay, yeah,
see
got
some
it. So
information, I can hide the class, I can delete it.
So my question here would be like, if you broke this down into the constituent API calls or
Mhm.
database queries, like however you think about it, like what does that look like?
So it's basically one API call that's probably populating all this class information.
So
Just like
is there one to begin with that gets the table?
yeah, so this is like a, slash admin
It's like
slash,
it's like get classes,
yeah, essentially. Yeah.
and then you drill down and it's like get class by some class ID.
Exactly. Class by the class ID. And then there's also some specific actions you can take, like, post update a class. And then some weirder ones like making a class publicly visible or not, which is basically just another API call update, or deleting a class.
Then you've got so then update class would just be like patch class or put class.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what does the stuff at the bottom do?
So some of these are just more random things like the links for the class, just to copy them for teachers, which is fine. Seeing who bought a class, so that's just another potential, API call, essentially to look at the purchases of the class, see the user, see what a user is currently seeing if they look at a class.
user. Okay, so it's basically like get classes, get class ID, patch class, and then get purchases
Yeah,
with a
I mean,
class
there's some
ID.
other small annoying ones. Like, for example, this dropdown is a different API call that's populating with information about the different teachers.
Okay, it's like get
So
teachers.
so it's not all like completely just straightforward pure crud. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. So I guess my question would be, and this is sort of like at the heart of kind of explaining the flank value prop too. It's like once you've got those five, like our outlook is like, okay, the bulk of the work and the complexity is just writing those five API endpoints. And then like the UI is just, I mean, if
so
it's
yeah,
customer facing, you might want it to look good, but it's kind of just like whatever. Like you just need something that like works, right?
yeah. I think the
And
tricky
I think
question is that like I would love for Flank to auto generate this form because that's exactly what's annoying, that the API calls are written, but then it's also a lot of time to doing forms in React or whatever is not fun. Um, and you can make some abstractions and stuff, but it's still annoying because you've got all these different fields with different types. But I think what would be tricky for a Flank is that there's still some annoying level of customization where like this thing needs to follow a specific format. Like I can't like toss a space in here, um, or like I can't have a date in the past. Um, well,
yeah,
that's not. But so there's just, or it doesn't even let me. It doesn't even show. So it'd be nice if they were basically a bunch of pre-built widgets, I guess you'd call them, with different validation rules. But it's tricky because some of the validations like ad hoc, like you don't want min age to be greater than max age. Just some like, and indeed maybe it would fail if I tried to update it, but it seems okay with that. Um, you don't want stuff like that.
yeah. So we don't have the UI for it, but we've got like the data model for a lot of the constraints and validations. Like you can set like a min date, for example. And you can like set like a regex pattern for strings.
Yeah, no, that would be
Um,
perfect. Yeah, this is basically a regex, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
and what you're saying about one thing depending on another, that's a little tricky. I almost feel like the way you'd want to do that is expose some sort of hook when you like create the run button that lets you
Mhm.
write like a little JavaScript just to check like field dependencies against each other because I
Yeah.
think it'd be hard to like do that sort of thing with like a UI.
No, I agree.
Um, but yeah, I guess my question would be, like given those five endpoints, like how do you sort of think in your head of like a system for getting them on the page as quickly as possible, as opposed to like manually building out all those forms and all that validation and stuff like that?
I'm not sure. What do you mean?
Well, I guess like what do you think like the ideal user experience looks like when
Got it.
you've got the endpoints written and then you're like, okay, I'm using Flank. I want to get this stuff sort of like
Yeah.
built as quickly as possible, you know?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, in some ways, I feel like an ideal user experience is that I can basically just give Flank a JSON-like object or a TOML or whatever you want that has the fields, the types, the constraints, um, and then somewhere else the API calls, and then it generates something like this. But a better idea might be that I go on Flank and I can basically just click like add field, and then that'll allow adding a constraint or whatever. So those are the
Do you have an open API spec for your stuff?
no. It's still relatively straightforward and it doesn't change too much. It is annoying though. It would be nice to do that.
Yeah, so it's like so one way we it's like we can consume an open API spec.
And the problem is OpenAPI is not that flexible. Like it doesn't. There's no concept of dates. I think you need to do a lot of open API extensions, which then it's kind of just like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Because a bunch of the open API schema is also around like security and headers and stuff like that, which I just don't care about, or like errors and
Yeah.
That's
So then how would you want to, so
I
then
was
how
almost
would you want to
like a
sorry, go
simple
ahead.
JSON, like a simple JSON where it's like, what's the field name, what's the label, what's the type, any constraints, validation, whatever, for all the fields in the table.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I don't know if that would be nice or if it'd actually be nice to have a, UI where I could build a table step by step and be like, add field, text, whatever.
No, that makes sense too. The what was I going to say? Um, oh, I know what I was going to say. Do you ever use like curl or Postman or like tools like that, like when you're developing the API?
So this is another kind of annoyance that I like. I basically built my own API client, which consumes the API for like purposes of seeding different test data. Which,
What is that? So what does that do?
well, it's kind of just like, when I started my server, I can basically, well, it's the same thing that is used for seeding the server during tests. So it's basically a little API client that um, can be called to basically populate the database tables with um, whatever data we'd want. So that's kind of how I handle the
Oh,
post.
and then you've got like a UI for that.
No UI. Yeah,
But
basically,
it's something that you can kind of call it on an ad hoc basis too.
I basically just run. I do cargo run dash dash bin test seed, and it just populates the test data. But you know, it's not great. But basically, like the annoying part about a postman or a curl is that um, everything has too many fields. So it's just annoying, and I don't want to keep it updated in like the postman stuff. And I don't even like postman, so I like just being able to share the API call parameter definitions. So then it's easy to write a client that just can call the API using those same um, using
Yeah,
those.
I'm almost imagining. I'm just trying to think about like how you could, let's say you don't have an open API spec, like how you could import one endpoint as quickly as possible. And it sounds like, at least for part of it, you'd want to take like an example payload and just paste that in there. And then
Yeah.
that thing just converts to like string field, number field, date field, kind of like going down the line.
No, that'd be a clever way of doing it. Yeah,
And then I guess you'd want to also put in the URL of the endpoint as well.
yeah.
And then, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
And just the way that you're building your API in Rust, there's not really like a quick way of exposing an open API.
Oh no, I'm sure there is. I just have no real reason to do it because no one's consuming it.
Fair.
Just because, I mean, the annoying part would just be that I mean, I haven't actually taken a look at them, but I assume then I just need to have all my type definitions in a specific format in a specific way. And if I can avoid doing that, it's nice.
Yeah, because a big thing we're trying to avoid with Flank is like the need for you to do like extra type of documentation or stuff around
Exactly.
it.
Yeah.
And
Like
I
I think
think
it's actually better to stay away from OpenAPI.
yeah, the payload way seems like a good like kind of little trick to get around it though.
Yeah. I mean, the types are complicated, but not that complicated. It's like I wouldn't be annoyed by actually writing that object myself. Like it wouldn't take that long. There's like 13 fields here. Like that's not even a big barrier to entry to me writing it myself.
Yeah, and maybe just being able to do it on an individual like basis and like decide like, oh, I only care about exposing these three things, so I can take the time
Exactly.
to read the
Yeah.
definitions for these three things, as
Yeah.
opposed to your Stripe example where it's like you have to have 50 times 50,000 or whatever.
Yeah. Exactly.
Matt, this has been like really like cool from a like meta perspective. Like I don't know, we talk about this problem every day with so many different types of people, and like I feel like there's been a lot of like cool like new ideas in this conversation. So just wanted to say like I don't know, thank
That's
you.
awesome. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I second Bryce. Do you have any thoughts? Just kind of a closing thought here. Like, I think something that we're struggling with is getting, and I think this is part of the struggle with the explanation is like getting people to see different places that it could be used. Like we got like one person who uses it to just like basically run lambdas that calculate like model performance data and like returns a table. And so they think of it as like an analytics dashboard, almost like a lightweight dashboard. Then there's like other people who use it for basically just like writing a stored procedure, exposing that. So it's almost like sharing queries,
Yeah.
like sharing SQL. And some of that's read only, some of that is write, some of that's like, like update this one field. But they think of it as like sharing SQL. Then there's like other people who use it to basically just wrap kind of like form input fields for a database. So they're almost like this is like a Google Forms for something that's going to touch Dynamo that like the end user doesn't know how to use Dynamo. Yeah, I guess like something that we're struggling with is like we say one of those things and it's like if someone it might like miss entirely, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's hard to kind of give like the smattering of ideas too.
Yeah. I mean, I think this best I can think is just the list of use cases, and
Yeah.
pitching whichever one you think would speak to someone the most. Um, but I guess I think about it generally as tools to build admin dashboard kind of thing faster, which I think everybody has. Like even when I was down in DC, I was talking to Chu for a while, and like they have a whole shit ton of tools that they built completely internally to do all the different things, and um, so I think that like most companies need some element of an admin dashboard, and so I think that kind of broad idea appeals to me. Um, then I think it's just the use case of seeing like this was what Matt was doing. Here's like a 200 line React form um, versus just doing this and then editing the forms as simple as adding this new field. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were to like quantify or like metricize in some, or like I guess like turn into a metric in some way, like how would you like what would you say is like the way the flank value prop kind of resonates with you?
I think time and maintenance burden. Because at least for me, I feel like I have way too much code. So pushing a lot of maintenance burden onto Flank in some ways is appealing.
And what does that feel like? Just that you don't have to worry about it at all.
Just time saving, and it's kind of like it's in some ways it's nice that the admin code shares the same as other code because like minutes, but it's also annoying because sometimes like I change something for the normal site UI and then it might cause a problem for the admin dashboard, which is stupid because I don't really care about the admin dashboard. Um, but if I didn't share stuff, then there'd be like 20 different ways to do forms, which would also be annoying. Um, So in some ways, I just think it's a nice separation of concerns, being able to lay the non-user visible stuff to Flank, um, so that your code can be more oriented for the one use case of like your own UI.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, hmm. Does anyone else have anything, or
No, I just wrote all that down because I think it's good to have flank in other people's words, but I feel like we're hearing some similar stuff again about like someone we talked
Yeah.
to this week was pretty much like, yeah, it seems like if people are using it for like dissimilar use cases, you kind of just have to hit them over the head with a bunch of use cases and be like, this is everything it could be, which feels a little bit like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Um,
I just like
but
the concrete use cases because it's hard to imagine something like Flank in the abstract sense. It's kind of the,
yeah,
just like when I try to describe Rookly, online chess lesson doesn't always seem that cool, but when we demo the platform, they get the idea.
yeah.
I think it's cool just seeing the use cases.
Yeah, I almost wonder if we should do something in newsletter format that like features a use case every week or something like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean that'd be good incentive just to like get us to write one out and think of it, once a week. So after like
Yeah,
20
yeah,
weeks,
yeah.
we have that list. This isn't a question, but I
Something
liked
we just did.
your
Oh, go
walkthrough of
ahead,
the
Trevor.
use. Very short. I just liked your walkthrough of the use case map and how like articulate it was. Just clearly because you use it, but
It's a very helpful use case for us. So yeah, very grateful.
Um, Something else that Bryce just built. I don't know if you ever run into this, but he just wrapped like GitHub Actions. And do you use GitHub Actions?
I do, but not much since it's only me, and
yeah,
it's still just annoying with actions to like ours is kind of complicated because the back end is in Rust. There's a Postgres database, there's the front end, so then, it's annoying to think about how in GitHub Actions would I expose I need to like spin up the test database. I need basically the latest version of the server. So I need to, pull it down from some ECR somewhere. And since it's just me, it's just easy to be disciplined and run tests using like a pre-commit type tool instead of worrying about actions. But if we ever hired someone, I would definitely like an easier way to do actions.
Yeah.
yeah, kind of
The
just like
Bryce just wrote a thing that like lets us do basically just wraps GitHub Actions and like just lets us run them from Blank, which lets us do them mobily because for some reason the GitHub app doesn't like let you run them
Yeah.
from
Well, I guess
GitHub. So annoying.
one other one I can mention then that is annoying is the deployment. It would be nice to have a portal for deployment. This is one of those things that would just save me some time, not that much time because I'm not deploying that often, but I basically have a set series of steps, which is, you know, publish the new versions of the code, run tests, whatever, and then they need to be built on code build. But it's really annoying to have to go to the AWS console and type the stuff in. So I just have like a little bit of Rust code that spins up a SDK client and calls the code build with the correct versions.
Yeah.
And then you have to wait till those are built. And then once those are built, I have to update the versions in the AWS CDK. And then I have to do CDK deploy, the different things that have changed. So, I mean, it's fine because it doesn't happen that often, but it's another potential, but I think a lot more complicated use case, which is like, basically orchestrating the deployment pipeline.
yeah.
So do you have to? So is it something that you could put everything into code? Oh, I guess like what? Explain to me like what's bad about that now. Is it the fact that?
It's just a lot of manual
Yeah.
steps. Of it's like, let's say I just released version 0.36.0. I need to go to the AWS console. I need to build the new backend server version 36, build the new front end server version 33. And then I need to open up the AWS CDK. Then I need to tell it in basically the configuration file to deploy with version 33 on the front end and version 36 on the back end. So it's some manual repetition in terms of keeping the version straight. And it's a bit more complicated than that. And it's also just annoying because there's no automation of like, oh, this finished and then this can run. It's kind of like I need to be like, oh, did this finish yet? Did this finish yet? And then I can, basically, because you can't deploy the new server version until they're built. Some annoyance there.
Would it even just be an improvement to be able to like say like I want to do those actions with these versions? Just to get
No,
rid of
exactly.
the waiting on one process. And
That's
another.
basically what I was envisioning. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a little annoying because you have to share stuff that's not natively shared. So there's some complexity, and and the AWS CDK is kind of magical. So I'm not sure how easy it is to containerize and stuff, but I'm sure there are improvements.
Thanks for listening to the Flank podcast. If you'd like to follow us, check out our site at flank.cloud and follow us on Twitter at flankatx. Bye.